So we can treat people with respect without actually respecting them, right? And we can be kind to others and do nice things for them and not actually care about them at all. Just because we pretend to feel or be something doesn't make it so. I can say that I'm a doctor and even put the clothes on and go to the hospital and start doing some of the things that the doctors do. But eventually I'm going to be found out. Eventually they're going to ask me to perform a surgery and I'm going to be like, never mind. I don't know how to do this, right? And it's the same thing with Christianity. You can't just say you're a Christian because this word means something. By saying that I am a Christian, I am saying I am a Christ follower, that I serve the Lord. That's what I'm saying. And if I don't actually love God and I'm not actually serving him and I'm not actually following Jesus, then I can go through all the motions and I can pretend, but I'm an imposter, right? And that's what we're going to see today in our lesson is that Eli's sons are priests and they go through all of the motions of being priests, but they're not actually serving God. And their entire job says that they are God's servants, but they're not serving him. And the reason is because they don't actually know him. And that's what we're going to see in the very first verse. In 1 Samuel 2:12, it says, the sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord. And remember that Eli had thought that Hannah was a worthless woman. But here it's saying his sons are actually worthless men. And remember that phrase means like child of Satan. And so what they're saying is they don't follow the ways of God. They follow the ways of Satan. And the reason is because they don't actually know God. And so then it goes on in verse 13 and it says, the custom of the priests with the people was that when any man offered a sacrifice, the priest servants would come while the meat was still boiling with a three-pronged fork in his hand. And he would thrust it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. And everything that the fork brought up, the priest would take for himself. And this is what they did at Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. Moreover, before the fat was even burned, the priest servant would come by and say to the men who were sacrificing, give me the meat for the priest to roast, for he will not accept boiled meat from you, only raw. And if the man said, let them burn the fat first, then take as much as you wish, the priest servant would say, no, you must give it to me now. If not, I'm going to take it by force. Thus the sin of the young men was very great in the sight of the Lord, for the men treated the offering of the Lord with contempt. And so there was a specific way that they were supposed to accept the sacrifices on behalf of the Lord. What they were supposed to do is take all of the fat from the animal and burn it first. And then they are to cook the meat. And after the meat was cooked, each sacrifice, for whatever purpose it was being sacrificed, they were supposed to take a specific piece of meat. So it would say, for this sacrifice, you would take the shoulder. For this sacrifice, you would take the wing, things like that. And so you can see here that by just dipping their fork in and getting whatever piece of meat that they wanted, they were not getting the exact piece that they were designated for whatever sacrifice. And then by taking the meat raw, before the fat had been burned, they were taking some of the fat with them and eating it. And that is not how the sacrifices were supposed to be done. They were always supposed to burn the fat to God. No fat was to be eaten by the people. And so it says, by treating God's sacrifices in this way, they were treating them with contempt. And even you realize, even the people notice that they're not supposed to be doing it this way. The priests are supposed to be the examples to the people, but the people are even aware this is not how it's supposed to be. And when they would try to do it the correct way, the priest would say, no, we're going to take whatever we want. And so they were using their chosen position that God had given to them to their own advantage, not to serve God, but to serve themselves so that they could get whatever they want. It's like, I'm the priest. I get to do what I want, and you're not going to do anything about it. And so they had complete disregard for God and his ways, right? And we see in the very beginning that the reason for this is because they don't actually know God. And that's what we're going to talk about at the very end of this regarding ourselves. But for now, we're going to go on and read and see what God has to say about Samuel, because it's completely different than what he says about Eli's sons. And so in verse 18 it says, "But Samuel ministered before the Lord, even as a child, wearing a linen ephod. His mother used to make him a little robe and bring it to him each year when she came with her husband to offer yearly sacrifices. And Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife and say, 'The Lord give you descendants from this woman for the loan that was given to the Lord.' Then they would go home to their own house. And the Lord did visit Hannah, so that she conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. Meanwhile, the child Samuel grew before the Lord." And so Samuel was also ministering before the Lord in the priestly clothes. And so he was acting the part, but he also was doing it in the way that pleased God. He was serving God honorably, even as a child, doing the things that the priests are supposed to do under the direction of Eli, the high priest. And then we also notice in this passage that because Hannah had loaned Samuel to the Lord, Eli was asking that God would give her more children so that she didn't lose the only son that she had. And God did. God gave her 3 sons and 2 daughters. And so this woman who had no children in the beginning now has 6 children, and one of them has been given completely to the Lord, but she still treats him like a son and makes him clothing and brings it to him every single year. And then she has these other 5 children that she's able to raise. And so what a great God that we have, that he honored the sacrifice that she gave to him in her son Samuel by rewarding her with these other children. And so in verse 22, we go back to Eli and his sons, and it says, "Now Eli was very old, and he kept hearing all that his sons were doing to all Israel, and how they lay with the women who were serving at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And he said to them, 'Why do you do such things? For I hear of your evil dealings with all these people, from all these people. No, my sons, it is no good report that I hear the people of the Lord spreading abroad. If someone sins against a man, God will mediate for him. But if someone sins against the Lord, who can intercede for him?' But they wouldn't listen to the voice of their father, for it was the will of the Lord to put them to death. Now the boy Samuel continued to grow both in stature and in favor with the Lord and also with man." So again, the contrast. These boys refused to listen to the warnings of their father and continued to use their priestly role for their own advantage and not to serve God. Yet Samuel continued to grow in stature and favor with God, and then also with all of the people, whereas the people were talking badly about the sons all of the time, right? And Eli even says that his sons have done such a horrible thing as to sleep with the women who are coming there to serve the Lord. And so he rebukes them. Yes, he does do that, and that's good, but he doesn't follow through with anything. He says, "This is a horrible things that I'm hearing about you guys. You've got to stop it. If you were doing something bad to other people, God would mediate for you. But if you're doing something bad against him, you can't expect such grace. And so what are you going to do? If God's against you, you're in big trouble." And you would think that such a warning would really be listened to, right? But the boys did not listen. And so Eli should have followed through. It's fine to try to persuade your children or someone who is under your authority to act in the right way. That's good. But if your persuasion doesn't work, then you have to move on to harsher consequences, right? And eventually, Eli should have stripped them of their role completely. He had that right as their father, and he had that right as the high priest. And that's what he should have done, but he didn't. And so it says that it was God's will to put them to death because of this, because they wouldn't change their ways. And yet, all the while, Samuel was acting exactly like he was supposed to be acting, right? And so in verse 27, it says, Then there came a man of God to Eli and said to him, This is what the Lord says. Did I indeed reveal myself to the house of your father when you were in Egypt, subject to the house of Pharaoh? Did I choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, to go up to my altar, to burn incense, to wear the ephod before me? I gave to the house of your father all of my offerings by fire for the people of Israel. Why then do you scorn my sacrifices and my offerings that I command for my dwelling, and honor your sons above me by fattening yourselves on the choicest parts of every offering of my people Israel? And so what he's talking about is whenever God chose Moses to lead the people out of Egypt, he chose Aaron to be his high priest. And Aaron is Eli's descendant. And so he said, I chose Aaron and his household to be priests to me from the very beginning. And I chose them to go up to my altar and burn the incense and wear the priestly clothes. And in exchange, I gave you the sacrifices, the meat of the people. And yet you treat all of it with contempt. Why is that? Why is it that I allow you up to my altar? I let you burn incense to me. I let you wear the clothes that say you represent me. And I give you this food, and yet you treat it with complete contempt. And he's including Eli in this, even though Eli has always served him faithfully, because Eli has allowed his sons to do these things. And so he's saying, you honored your sons above me. You cared more about your sons' feelings than you did my laws. And so because of this, you're treating my sacrifices with contempt, just like they did. Because you're not regarding them as more important than your sons and telling your sons, you're done. You're not serving God honorably, and therefore you don't get to serve God at all. That's what Eli should have done. But by caring more about his son's feelings than he did about God's laws, then God said, I made your family priests, and I promised that your house and the house of your father would go in and out before me forever. But now I say, far be it from me. For those who honor me, I will honor, and those who despise me, I will lightly esteem. Behold, the days are coming when I will cut off your strength and the strength of your father's house, so that there will not be an old man in your house. Then, in distress, you will look with an envious eye on all the prosperity that shall be bestowed on Israel, and there shall be not an old man in your house forever. The only one of you whom I shall not cut off from the altar shall be spared to weep his eyes out, to grieve his heart. And all the descendants of your house shall die by the sword of man. This that shall come upon the two of your sons, Hophni and Phinehas, shall be the sign to you. Both of them shall die on the same day. I will raise up for myself a faithful priest, who shall do according to what is in my heart and what is in my mind. I will build him a sure house, and he will go in and out before my anointed forever. Everyone who is left in your house will come to implore him for a piece of silver and a loaf of bread, and shall say, Please put me in one of the priest's places, that I may eat a morsel of bread. And so, as I said before, Aaron was the very first high priest. And then when he died, it got handed to his son Eleazar. And when Eleazar died, his son Phinehas was the high priest. And God renewed this with Phinehas, this covenant of being the high priest forever, because Phinehas, it says, was zealous for his God and stood up for God. But Eli's lineage was actually not through Eleazar. It was actually through Aaron's other son, Ithamar. And so for whatever reason, Eleazar's sons, I guess, couldn't serve for some reason, and it went to Ithamar's sons. And so God was still honoring his promise to Aaron that it would be through his lineage, but Eli's sons are not worthy of this honor. And so God is saying, I am going to strip this honor from your family, and I'm going to give it back to Eleazar's family, because I'm going to still honor my promise to Aaron, but your sons are not worthy. And so your sons are going to die both on the same day. And by this, you will know that I am telling the truth. And then I will raise up another person who will do according to what is in my heart and what is in my mind. So who is going to actually follow me and actually serve me. I'm going to raise up a priest like that. And then I am going to make his house sure forever. So I'm going to make sure that his family are actually priests to me as long as the priesthood exists. And then he says, because your sons took whatever piece of meat that they wanted and took for granted the food that they were given, I am going to make the remainder of your house, those that don't get killed by the sword, I'm going to make sure that they are hungry. And they have to go and ask the other priests for food. And then you will see that this was an honor given to you and not something that you should have expected or taken for granted. And so Eli put his own son's feelings before God's laws. And because he did not punish his children, God punished him along with his children. He killed his sons and punished Eli's lineage. Eli became complicit in his own son's dealings because he didn't make them stop. Matthew 10:37-39 says, he who loves father or mother more than me isn't worthy of me. And he who loves sons or daughters more than me isn't worthy of me. And he who doesn't take up his cross and follow after me is not worthy of me. He who finds his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will find it. And so what God is saying is if you put anybody before me, then you're not worthy of me. Nothing is supposed to come before me.